light within my heart, light within my thoughts, light within my words. May one and all and everything, blessed and loved, ever be. Welcome. I am Sister Who. There are perhaps a lot of things in our world that are duplicitous, that two different things going on, a sense of duplicity, a sense of being dual. In the last week or so, to back up, I guess, there are parts of me that would really like this show to be more perfect, if I could be more eloquent and more perfectly focused at all times, and everything proceed in a very orderly manner. And it kind of hints at that duplicity, that in a way this is a reality show because I'm talking to you very directly, and these shows for the most part are unscripted. Whatever happens, happens. Whatever is said is said, and I don't plan to say the things I do. I just talk to you as the person who I genuinely am. The challenge with video production is that it's a kind of duplicity, because on one hand, you're seeing a real person, and as a real person, I'm not perfect, and I never will be, and I will stumble over my words, and I'll repeat things, I'll use the wrong words sometimes, and to take it all out in editing so that you get the illusion of perfection suggests that on some level Sister Who is a robot, and that this is not an unscripted show. But instead, what I present is someone who is absolutely real, who stumbles for words, who, in spite of having superior intelligence, not superior, but I don't know that anything is really superior, but it's a higher measure of intelligence in certain areas. My intelligence actually tops out at a 133 when I had my IQ tested at one point, and I wanted to know what I was dealing with. But the problem with having a higher IQ in certain areas is that it doesn't prevent you from making mistakes or saying the wrong thing or not knowing how to behave in certain situations. What seems to fundamentally make me autistic is this inability to blur things enough or ignore things or embrace duplicity in order to deal with social situations, which is where, when I get in social situations where there are a lot of vague terms and generalities used, I get very confused because I don't know what they're talking about and I don't know what they really mean. But if we talk about those particular areas where my intelligence excels, then I'm having to explain things to people that they're having a more difficult time grasping. And in one of my previous shows, I made the comment that I think neurotypicals are the ones with the disability, not autistics, because for neurotypicals, they go through their entire lives seeing everything a little bit out of focus. And for autistics, everything is so hyper-focused that it becomes so intense that trying to multitask is almost impossible for me, because I have to think in one direction at a time, because everything is so hyper-focused, so intensely, sharply focused. For a neurotypical person, that's not the case. They can notice this or not notice that or look at whatever, and it's just kind of all a big picture that blurs together, and they're okay with that. I think that's a disability because there's so many things they are not seeing. What this comes back to is that on one level, I'm a real person. I'm a human being making this show. And as such, I'm never going to be as perfect or as regular as a robot. And on the other hand, video production, the nature of it is such, whether it's recorded on digital memory or videotape or a DVD or whatever, these sorts of productions have a way of lasting a very, very, very long time and not changing the whole time. 30 or 40 years from now, people will be able to watch this show and I won't look any different. And I don't even know if I'll still be alive. But I'm fairly certain I won't look the same. So in one sense, I would like the show to be as perfect as possible because I don't want people to remember my mistakes forever, literally forever. And on the other hand, it's the mistakes that confirm that I am a real person talking to you. And so it becomes this, not to make light of it, but a schizophrenic in the sense, not in the clinical sense, but in the sense of having two things going on at once, like a two-headed monster or something. Schizophrenia is a whole different realm that doesn't really relate to that. But in schizophrenia, the brain, if I understand correctly, the brain splits into different directions, and you have one thing going on here and another thing going on there. Well, where this all comes down to the present challenge is understanding that on one level, I'm a real person giving a in-the-moment kind of response and performance, though I'm not really trying to perform, I'm just being myself and talking about things. I am a real person in the moment. I'm not a robot, and this isn't pre-scripted, and I'm not watching a teleprompter. That being the case, this is a recording of a particular moment, and the recording will not change, but I will. And this becomes difficult when you get into the realm of expectations, because, for example, if I call a customer service number to get help with my computer, they have a particular script they're supposed to follow. When I don't follow that script, when I ask a question that they didn't anticipate, they don't always know how to answer. And they want me to be just like everyone else, and I'm not. And they want me to answer the way a robot would, and I'm not a robot. So I can't answer that way. And that's where I'm encouraging more and more people to look at things individualistically. That the person with whom you're speaking is an individual. They don't follow a script. They have questions you haven't thought of. Maybe they have a question that has been answered before, but maybe the way you answered it before won't work for them. And especially when you get into the realm of people with disabilities, they have 1,000 different ways of answering challenges. They can get the job done, but they will probably do it in a way that is different from everyone else. Is that good or is that bad? It depends on how you look at it. Good or bad for what? With job applications, it's a similar sort of dilemma. When the application sets forth a standard one-size-fits-all format that could be answered very well by a robot. By a human being, it becomes much more confusing. Because a lot of job applications, for example, at one point will ask, what's your gender? Well, I'm told that there are actually 10 different ways to define gender, and at the moment there are at least 4 that are in circulation, possibly 5, but I don't know if the 5th one wants to identify all the time. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. Sometimes it's an advantage because they'll understand things that other people won't. That being that we have male, female, binary, non-binary, bisexual, and the 5th one I was thinking of would be transgender. And some transgender people don't want to be known as such. They want everyone to think of them as their intended gender, as the person they find themselves to be on the inside, whether or not they have gone through the steps or had sufficient financial resources to go through the steps to create external congruity with the internal reality. Regardless, to me, it's important that they be themselves because they have a unique experience, and all of that experience informs them in some way. There are women who have never seen life through the eyes of a man, and there are women who have been born in male bodies and sought to achieve congruity between the two. On the outside they were a man, but on the inside they were a woman, and trying to figure out who they are in the midst of that crux. That again is something that a robot will never have to face because a robot is programmed to do one thing or another. And on a job application, they'll ask questions. Is this the answer or that the answer? It's yes or no to everything. When in fact, for a human being, the answers might be more vague. Are you single? Have you ever been divorced? Are you separated? They're not the same thing. So it depends on which question you ask. The challenge, I guess, is the way our society is set up to actually invite people to be robots. Society wants standard answers. And yet at the same time, the only thing that keeps society alive and moving is the fact that we are not robots. And that's why I'm often saying that when we bring our humanity to a task, we bring a creativity and an ingenuity and an empathy that can make the positive difference. And to the extent at which people are asked to be robots and to leave their humanity behind, especially for financial reasons, it makes me cringe, because I've said for years, when money becomes the measure, community always suffers, because the gifts that community needs to survive are only found in individuals. They're not found in the community as a whole. And the fact that a community encounters a challenge it cannot solve suggests that the answer may be hidden in one of the community's individuals, but it is an answer with which the community is not familiar. And to the extent that the community insists upon that which is familiar, this is the way we've always done it, this is the way it's supposed to be, those are all robotic dynamics. Those are not human dynamics. When we have a person who can feel and think and see and understand and learn, and not just in the sense of AI, of artificial intelligence, a computer learning according to the responses, but the person learning about the environment, about the material, about this or that, and then putting the two together in ways that the computer never would have thought of doing. I'm reminded of a particular episode of Star Trek in which there is a threat from, I believe it was the Romulans, and the Romulans, of course, have spaceships that can be cloaked or made invisible to the sensors of other ships. In this particular episode, the United Federation of Planets has received word that the Romulans may try to attack and take over a particular Vulcan planet. And so they try to set up a barricade of Federation starships, but they don't have enough captains to commandeer all the ships. They have more ships than they have captains. And so a lot of the bridge crew that is assigned to Captain Picard of the Next Generation series are given their own ships to commandeer for that particular battle. But of course, it's a battle that never really happens, but it's a battle that could happen. So they're lining up as if there's the threat of a battle, but thankfully it doesn't happen. One of the ships is commandeered by none other than Commander Data, who is an android. He's not human. And yet in that situation, the Romulans are approaching, and he deduces with his android mind where the attack would come if it did come, and he acts in a way that he's told to move back, and he ignores the order, remarkably for an android, and decides to fire some, not bullets, but photon torpedoes or something, but he fires some weaponry into the space where he calculates the attack would come. He doesn't hit anything, but it's enough to alert the Romulans, whom he cannot see, that they cannot safely go through that space. And so they turn around and go home and concede the battle without ever appearing, without ever turning off their cloaking devices, their invisibility screens, and without ever fighting the battle. They go home. But Commander Data fired these shots after he was ordered to retreat, to reestablish a better position in another place. But he knew where the attack was coming by his calculations and acted. And then later, when he's meeting with Captain Picard, he expects to be court-martialed because he violated the rules. He didn't follow the order. And Captain Picard corrects him and says, "We're not going to court-martial you. I don't want people who will blindly follow my orders without thinking for themselves." And so in thinking for himself and coming up to a solution that no one else imagined, and even the bridge crew that he was given on that vessel resisted his attempts to ignore the orders. And I have to think, from an android perspective, Commander Data chose to invoke the inflections of anger in order to manipulate the crew, because he didn't have any emotion to bring to the matter. But he didn't give the order in a totally neutral way. He gave it with the sound of anger in his voice, that he was becoming impatient with the bridge crew, and he told them under no, in no questionable way, fire. And they did. And that's what stopped the battle from ever happening, because they didn't believe his calculations. He knew what he was doing, but nobody else did. And he did something that was contrary to orders. He did the wrong thing by breaking the rules, and he stopped the battle from ever happening. And Captain Picard was grateful that he did so. The challenge to us as human beings is recognizing when is the time to do the wrong thing. And why are we doing it? To be really clear with why we're doing it and what is at stake and what the real goal is, and that it's not about what the surface appearances are, but it's about being the human that we are and doing what only we would know to do, that no machine or robot or android could be programmed to do. And I guess the fascinating thing when we talk about Star Trek and this merging of races and species and ethnicities and types of people, and even an android thrown into the mix, that they all had different languages, and somehow they learned to understand and communicate enough to collaborate. And I looked it up once for myself just to see, because I wondered, where did the word robot come from anyway? And I know English is this melting pot of languages, but I found that the word robot actually came from the Czech language. Not at all what I would have expected, and kind of amusing in a way. And not that we shouldn't take things from the Czech language, but it's a language that pertains to a particular small country in Europe that I doubt a lot of U.S. Americans would imagine when they were trying to list all the languages that have contributed to English as it's spoken in the United States. So just a bit of trivia, but that was kind of interesting to me that the word robot actually came from the Czech language. In any case, it's fascinating as we dig into, and according to the Peter, Paul and Mary song, the word okay comes from the Choctaw language, a Native American Indian language, but I feel better calling them the Choctaw. But of course, I hope everyone knows who the Choctaw were or are. And of course, raises the question, are there any pure-blood Choctaw today? I don't know, and I don't know if it matters, but I still think the wisdom of the Choctaw needs to be preserved. And when you think about American Indian or Native American, both of those are Eurocentric terms. They're not terms that really should be applied to the people to whom they are genuinely applied. Those people may be the Choctaw or the Cherokee or the Sioux or whomever, but in every case, we're talking about real people. We're not talking about robots. And if you try to establish a one-size-fits-all, this is the language, this is the only language, this is the only way the language is ever used, I imagine there were as many different ways to use the Choctaw language as there were Choctaw people. And I imagine there were as many different ways to speak Pueblo as there were Pueblo people, or Lakota Sioux as there were Lakota Sioux people. Everyone has their own personality that they bring to it. And it's that human creativity and ingenuity that makes the difference. It's not about making everything so perfect and so regulated that in one sense we achieve a perfection of appearance, but in another sense we lose our humanity in the process. Losing one's humanity is that's a loss of such tragic proportions. I don't know too many people who have really considered it. The challenge for me doing my television show and all of that is that I allow myself to be human and attempt to trust the work, and that somehow by intuition or divine guidance or whatever you want to call it, I will say the right things that people need to hear when I have no idea who will be watching or when or how many times the particular episode will be replayed. And there are times where I feel a duty to create a show when I myself may not be at my best. This past week for me has been so overwhelming, and to come to making a show while feeling overwhelmed and trying not to worry about feeling overwhelmed but just make the show, my humanity becomes a little more obvious than I would want it to be. Nonetheless, I attempt to take the opportunity and the raw material and go forward as well as I can, do the best I can, understanding that if I try to do my best tomorrow, it won't look the same. because every single day for a human being is unique and different. What a lot of people may overlook who don't understand autistics is that every single day is a myriad of details looking for a place and a form and a sequence. And so in that sense, every single day is a struggle for me. And I'm not saying that to say poor little me or anything or feel sorry for me. That's not the point. The point is to recognize that there are many more things going on, many more things occurring than that of which most people are aware. And in pausing to think and to look and to feel, we raise our awareness and we begin to notice other things that are going on that we hadn't noticed before. There are so many movies and so many books that each time I read them, each time I see them, each time I experience them, I notice something I didn't notice before. Can I honestly say that it wasn't there before? Probably not. But what is it in me that has changed that would make me more sensitive to those details this time around? You know, every time I see a movie, no matter how many times I see it, every time I see it, I'm different because I have additional memories and additional experiences that alter my interpretation and my perception, that alter my subjective experience in ways that I can't necessarily control, but I try to integrate them in positive ways. The challenge to the employment world, I guess, is that when someone comes to apply for a position, to recognize whether that person's humanity will help in some way, will improve the company, will help their coworkers. There was one particular day I worked in an office as just an office assistant. I jokingly described to someone once that the administrative assistant is the one who knows how to beat a particular program into submission. Because it was a computer program that is so problematic, you need someone who's going to know how to outthink it and make it do what you want it to do, otherwise the program will not cooperate. Well, on this particular day, I was in the office and it was in the holiday season, and someone had delivered the Christmas tree to the office, and without asking the person in charge, one of the two owners of the company who had ordered the Christmas tree, they decided that the tree was too tall, and so the obvious thing was to cut off all the branches and cut off the trunk. And the person came in a little while later who had paid for the tree, and he was positively livid because he didn't want them to cut off the bottom of the tree. He wanted them to cut off the top of the tree and work the branches in wherever they fit. So there would be a more full-looking tree, but it would be really full all the way up to the ceiling instead of coming to a point. Well, in this big argument, the office staff decided they didn't want to deal with it, and he was too upset, so he went to his office. So I came in about 4 hours later, and the tree was still laying in the middle of the floor with nobody doing anything to it, because no one had solved the problem. They just got angry, went their separate ways, and left the tree laying there. So because I had more empathy than others in the office, I waited an hour or so till I understood as completely as I could what was going on, and then I peeked around the corner to make sure he was in his office alone, and I just stuck my head in and I said something like, "I understand you're having a bad day." And he kind of looked up from the desk with a pouty expression on his face and said, "They destroyed my tree." And I just very gently said, "So what would you like to do about it? How do we make this better?" And I was able to give him the emotional support he needed so that we could move past that, get the tree put together and standing in the office and fix it however we could and decorate it, and everything worked out fine. But at that moment, someone was needed, not a robot, but a human being who was able to empathize and understand that he was feeling very betrayed by his office staff and that he had a particular idea, but he hadn't said it, so nobody knew. And of course, they presumed, which is never the right thing, without asking. And because he wasn't there yet, they thought they were supposed to deal with it. And so they dealt with it, but they dealt with it the wrong way. He came an hour later, and a whole conflict erupted. But the point was that only by being fully human was I able to insert love into that situation and bring a sense of healing. And I think it is not about patting myself on the back. It is the point that each one of us encounters different situations at different times, and only by being fully human can we embrace that situation and be present and allow it to achieve its best possible outcome. I'm reminded of a placard that hangs on my wall in my house that simply says, I think it's by N.R. Hart, if I remember right. I have no idea who that is, but thank you to whoever it is. The placard simply says, "And if you cannot find your way out of the dark, I will sit next to you and show you the stars." And you think back to pre-modern times, the stars are what sailors used for navigation. And it wasn't until it was dark, until it was nighttime, and they brought out their instruments, that they were able to find, by measuring the stars, where they were and which direction to go. In the daytime, they had no way of knowing because they couldn't see the stars. Just like Commander Data not being able to see the Romulan ships and yet knowing they must be there and firing in that direction blindly, but it was enough to prevent a battle from ever happening. And when we approach situations being fully human and bringing our sense of love and our sense of empathy and being with someone, that's when the miracles of compassion can happen. Thank you very much for watching today. I hope that I have said some things that are helpful to you.